The term hydrozoning means the placement of plant types with similar needs in groupings based on your garden's microclimate, soil, and water conditions. For example, if you have an area of shade in the garden, you would designate this as a separate hydrozone and choose plants that will grow well in the shade. Also, because being cooler than other areas in the garden, it will not lose as much water to the hot sun, and it will have different water demands throughout the year. On the other hand, say you have an area along a pathway at the side of the house facing south. It's likely that this area will get a lot of direct and reflected heat, causing high rates of evapotranspiration. For this area, you will need a group of plants that will tolerate these conditions, and you will need to provide a similar irrigation to match their needs. Soils, too, can be a basis for selecting and grouping plants in a separate hydrozone. If you have heavy soil, be aware that areas of lower elevation will hold moisture for longer periods. Even though this area is in full sun, it may collect and hold water in the soil for prolonged periods. You will not need to irrigate this area as frequently as the south-facing planting bed against the house, and you will need to select plants that are suited to heavy soils. Let's take a look at the hydrozones for Gary and Crystal's garden. Based on the sunshade pattern, we determined that Zone A is situated against the north face of the house and will be shaded in varying degrees throughout the year. This tells us two things. The evapotranspiration rates will be lower here than in the rest of the garden, and we will need to select plants that grow well in this type of shade, cast shade. Because the evapotranspiration is lower, it will need less water than it would be were it on the south face of the house. The next zone we see is an area along the eastern side of the garden. It's a swale, meaning that it's been graded to collect runoff from Gary and Crystal's and the neighbors' yards. Because of this, we have chosen to designate this as a separate hydrozone, Zone B, and we will choose plants that will tolerate moisture conditions for this area. Towards the sidewalk, we know that Gary and Crystal would like to retain some lawn, and we have chosen this area for that purpose. This will require a different irrigation regime than the other planted areas, so we will designate this as Area C, a third hydrozone. We have already decided that the oak tree that Gary and Crystal want will be placed so that it does not block their view of the mountains to the north. Once it grows, it will create its own microclimate around it, and therefore we have elected to create a separate hydrozone, Zone E. Finally, based on Gary and Crystal's list of wants, the design will include a walkway from the sidewalk to the front entry. Doing this will create planting zones on either side. Because these are bounded by pavement, the evapotranspiration rates will be higher here than most parts of the garden. We therefore choose to create a separate hydrozone, Zone D. Notice how this zone covers two separate planting beds. Hydrozones do not need to be one continuous area. You can create a hydrozone diagram for your own renovation project. First, make a sketch of your property. Include house and any existing features such as trees, patios, walkways, etc. Draw a north arrow and now with an erasable pencil begin marking out areas of sun and shade. At different times of the day, note the position of the sun and what areas of the garden are exposed to the sun. You should do this over a few different days and at different times of the year for best results. Then label each shaded area. At this stage, you should test the soil and the drainage in each area. Either send a sample for each area to a lab for analysis or do your own test. At Gary and Crystal's garden, we learned that we have a uniform soil that is a sandy loam. And, as a result, we did not have to create hydrozones based on specific soil differences within the garden. However, that may not be the case for your garden. With this information, you can finalize your hydrozone diagram and move to plant selection. Decide where you need screens and hedges, where to place accent plants, which foundation plants to choose. Begin with one area at a time, grouping plants based on their suitability for each hydrozone. And keep on going until you have all your plants selected. Don't forget to locate fruit trees and sunny exposure. You can group them with other ornamentals with similar needs. You have just created a great foundation for a successful, low water use garden.